This is, for those of you that are new, this is a little different from any other big book meeting that you might have been to before, because it was based out of my own self-will run riot. I would go to meetings and I go, well, if I, like the man that sits in the Florida sunshine goes, if I was running the show here, right? Well, that's why I'd go to big book meetings. I'm like, if I was doing this big book meeting, this is how I do it. So we started this. The format of the meeting is we don't do any readings in the beginning. Instead, we do an overview of the whole 164. So you know exactly why we're reading what we're reading tonight. And if somebody's new or hasn't been familiar with the big book, they can kind of know why we're reading what we're reading tonight. Okay? During the reading, there is only one person that reads. That would be me. And during the reading, we really encourage crosstalk, questions. Shout them out. If you have something, what's that mean? Hold on. Interaction. But it's not the time during the reading to share for 10 minutes or check in about your cat or your roommate or anything like that. So, sorry to you cat people. Tonight, we are going to be reading more about alcoholism. There's more? So, when I first got sober, somebody gave me a big book, right? And I'd be like, well, yeah, I'm not going to read that. Right? Awfully big. But then I realized, this is the program, these are the stories. Oh, stories are very important. There are personal experiences with this program since the beginning of AA. The program doesn't change. The stories do change. They've changed over our 4 different editions, okay? So, if you have a 4th edition big book and this book, Experience, Strength, and Hope, which is all the stories that have been taken out of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd edition, you have everything, all the stories that have ever been written in the big book. Pretty cool. Took me a few years to get that. I was like, wow, they're right there. Before the internet came out, I was like, I need to find a 1st edition so I can read that story, and but we'll get to that in a second. In the very beginning now, so let's pretend for this scenario that we are the original members. We're scattered through Ohio and New York and everywhere else, right? We're maybe 40 to 100 people by this time in 1939 when we put out our book. The preface says that we don't change the 164 pages. Let me ask again, does anybody need a big book? Good idea to have a big book in a big book meeting. Right up here. Just bring them back after you're done. So the preface, we don't change the 164 pages, which outlines our program of Alcoholics Anonymous. At the end of the preface, we say, we hope that in the stories or in the beginning of the book, if you are one of us, that somewhere along the line you might go, I felt like that. I think this might work for me. I might be an alcoholic, right? In other words, me too, right? The A, B, and C. Then the forwards, 4 different editions, 4 different forwards. The first one, 1939, our first book came out, and it says the main purpose of this book is to show you precisely how we have recovered. That means there's clear-cut directions in there. You ever hear somebody says there's suggestions? Well, over our course of experiences and different stories and experiences, different people have come. 90 meetings in 90 days is not a clear-cut direction in the big book. But it's a good suggestion, right? There you go. Then, in the second edition, 1955, we threw in some history. That's how we met, how we developed, how we came about, and how we grew. The third edition, 1976, and the 4th edition came out in 2001. Both of those go over which stories were taken out, which stories were put in, and how we've grown over different countries and different places, and how many more groups have scattered all over the world, okay? Doctor's opinion is where the big book basically starts, okay? Our founders are Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. The doctor's opinion was not written by Dr. Bob. It was written by Dr. Silkworth at Towns Hospital. He's the doctor, let's say, as if Towns was the detox. The only hospital that specialized in drug and alcohol addiction, Dr. Silkworth was the chief physician there. So he kind of knew a little bit about us, and he detoxed Bill a couple times. It's kind of like if we went down to Harvard General or Redgate a couple times, and every time we walked in, they were like, you again. Sorry, we don't have a pill that'll fix you. But whatever these men have to say seems to work. And that was the good doctor's opinion. He did mention, though, that we have an allergy. There's something different with us that we doctors can't seem to fix, right? You're irritable, restless, and discontent. You have this allergy that develops a phenomenon of craving. Whatever doctors say, frothy emotional appeal, or family members, nothing seems to suffice, but something that has depth and weight, a message of somebody that's walked where you've walked and has survived it, seems to hit hard with you guys. You need basically a spiritual slap on the head, and we don't have a pill to fix that. So whatever these men have to say seems to work. And that was the good doctor's introduction to us. Okay? Then Bill tells his story. He's our first founder, Bill Wilson. Okay? He got December 11th, 1934 was his sobriety date. He stayed sober 6 months before he met Dr. Bob, but that's his story. And in there, if I'm brand new to the program, I might go, wow, wait, I can relate. You know, he had the big ego, I'm going to conquer the world, and then drinking took over, and then stealing from family, depression, one more time tried, now self-knowledge, that's the answer, and all these other things until the message was carried to him and the importance of carrying it to another. In there, you might find those A, B, and C's. Oh my gosh, I'm an alcoholic, because we related to his story, right? And there's a solution. We all kind of chime in and we go, a lot of us were just like Bill. You might be one of us, a real Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. And we describe the alcoholic. And then we say, we have an answer, we have a solution, come along for the ride. Today we're going to be reading more about alcoholism, and it's just like in a participation meeting. We have a couple different stories of different people in our early recovery, and they tell their story. So in there, just like in a participation meeting, you might go, wow, I really related to you when you shared, right? Then we agnostics. It's a whole chapter dedicated to don't overthink the God thing. You lack that power. Obviously, at home by yourself, you have not been able to stop this, right? So you lack the power to do that. So there's obviously, since now thousands and millions of people have managed to not die of this, there's a power bigger than you that's managed to keep you sober, right? There's nothing about step 2 that says you have to define and know God before you can do the steps, okay? That ice cube melts slow sometimes by doing the steps. We just have to realize we lack that power. If you got a God, good. If you don't worry about it, but just come along for the ride, okay? Just realize you lack that power. And there's a power bigger than you, right? How it works, we start the steps. Step 3 and step 4, we do an inventory. We talk about resentments, fear, and sex, right? And we learn a few facts about ourselves. In chapter 6, into action, we get a sponsor. We learn how to tell that story. We learn how to learn those facts about ourselves, sort them out, figure out what our character defects are, how to clean up the wreckage of our past, how to stay spiritually fit in 10, and how to keep close to that higher power in 11. And then in chapter 7, working with others, is all about an introduction to others, or step 12. How we reach our hand out to somebody else. We don't talk down, we don't criticize, we don't talk from a moral or spiritual hilltop. So there's nothing in that chapter that says we tell the newcomer, shut up, take the cotton out of yours and put it, you know. We might tell them, you can't share for 40 minutes, but stay still, we got an answer. Listen to what we have, you know what I mean? But nowhere in there did we tell people, shut up. We just talk about how we share our message to somebody else by telling our story and then letting them tell theirs. To the wives, to the family, to the employers. Remember when this book came out, it wasn't just us picking it up in 1939. There were going to be wives of people that were dealing with alcoholism, employers, family. So there's an introduction to Al-Anon, how to deal with the alcoholic. An employer, if you got a drunk one of us, give them a book, send them to a meeting. If you got a drunk one coming back, these are the things you might encounter. We also talk about the 4 different stages of alcoholism and the problems we might have coming back to the family afterwards. And a vision for you, Bill sums it all up. The whole 164, think about it. At the very end, that last page, we sometimes read it in a meeting, it says, we realize we know only little. By this point in 1939, we had, at the most, 4 years of sobriety, right? 2 years. And we wrote a book that would change the lives of people for almost a century now, right? So, that is the 164. That is our program in print. And the first story is always Dr. Bob, our second founder. Any questions? Woo! Are we ready to do this? Yeah. All righty. Like I said, we are in more about alcoholism. Chapter 3, which is on page 30. Now, also, do you remember in how it works? When we read that in a meeting, somebody will read a portion of chapter 5. At the end of it, we end with A, B, and C. A, I'm an alcoholic. B, probably couldn't manage my whole life. Something bigger than me is going to have to work, right? It's the premise of steps 1 and 2. I'm an alcoholic. The original manuscript, which is up here if anybody ever wants to read it, at that point once said, in the manuscript before the book came out, said if you're not convinced of A, B, and C, steps 1 and 2, reread the book up until this point or throw it away. But being convinced, you're now at step 3, right? So that tells me that everything up until this point, chapter 5, is steps 1 and 2. So I'm learning how to figure out whether or not I am an alcoholic, whether I am like you guys, right? I'm learning steps 1 and 2. So keep the A, B, and C in mind when we read some of those original first chapters, because we're trying to find out, how am I? Right? So chapter 3, more about alcoholism. Most of us have been unwilling to admit that we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think that he's bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it's not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. The idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. This persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost self that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. Sorry, I came into the program with some old-timers. We don't stomp our feet when we say that, because it's so powerful to say. Why do we read these things in the beginning of a meeting? Because they're important, right? We want the person that's new, that's never been here, to hear these things. And to fully concede that I think I'm an alcoholic is kind of an important statement. Not this, when do I stomp my foot and say smash, because I missed the point of what they were just talking about, right? And it also says that that's the first step in recovery. So where it goes, that's where you find step 1, right there, right there, right there. Well, no. Remember, we found it in the doctor's opinion when he talked about, a few simple steps and tools laid at their feet. A spiritual difference is what we need, right? And to figure out that we're alcoholic if we even have the allergy. Bill talked about it. We talked about it in There's a Solution. So we find steps 1 and 2 throughout all of that. Just because we say that conceding or admitting that we're alcoholics is the first step doesn't mean that that's the only place we're going to find it, okay? We alcoholics are men and women who've lost the ability to control our drinking. We know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control. All of us felt at times that we were gaining control, but such intervals, usually brief, were inevitably followed by still less control, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. We are convinced to a man that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness. Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. We're like men who have lost their legs. They never grow new ones. Neither does there appear to be any kind of treatment which will make alcoholics of our kind like other men. We've tried every imaginable remedy. In some instances, there's been brief recovery, followed always by a still worse relapse. Physicians who are familiar with alcoholism agree there's no such thing as making a normal drinker out of an alcoholic. That science may one day accomplish this, but it hasn't done so yet. Despite all we can say, many who are real alcoholics are not going to believe that they're in this class. By every form of self-deception and experimentation, they will try to prove themselves exceptions to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. Anybody here ever do that? Well, maybe I'm not. Maybe I can still just drink on the weekend. Maybe. Just because my heart stopped doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. If anyone who is showing the inability to control his drinking can do the right about face and drink like a gentleman, our hats are off to him. Heaven knows we've tried hard enough and long enough to drink like other people. Brings up a topic. How many people have heard when somebody leaves that says that they're not alcoholic and they're like, they'll be back. Yeah, I hope they, and then they won't talk to him or they shun him. I know someone who was going to meetings for many years because her husband was an alcoholic. And when that happened, people wouldn't talk to her. But she is only going because of her husband and because she had a surgery or, and she drank a glass of wine here and there with her friends for many, many years. But it was like she just thought that was kind of hurtful. And we're quick to jump on that, aren't we? Oh. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to be concerned if somebody says, leaves and doesn't want to come back for whatever reason. We try to be as supportive and helpful as we can, but all we can do is reach a hand out and say, we're here when you need us, right? But our hats are off to them. We don't criticize them for that. We have tried long enough to drink like other people. Here are the methods we've tried. Drinking beer only, limiting the number of drinks, never drinking alone, never having it in the house, never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties, switching from scotch to brandy, drinking only natural wines, agreeing to resign if ever drunk on the job. Mine was maybe if ever caught, if I couldn't lie my way out of it. Taking a trip, not taking a trip, swearing off forever with or without a solemn oath, taking on more physical exercise, reading inspirational books, going to health farms and sanitariums, accepting voluntary commitments to asylums. We can increase the list ad infinitum, on and on and on. We don't like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself. Step over to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. Try to drink and stop abruptly. Try it more than once. It will not in between drinks, like, okay, I'm going to stop. And 5 minutes later go, okay, now I'm going to start. See, I'm not an alcoholic. It will not take long for you to decide. If you are honest with yourself about it, it would be worth a bad case of the jitters if you get full knowledge of your condition. Though there's no way of proving it, we believe that early in our drinking careers, most of us could have stopped drinking, but the difficulty is that few alcoholics have enough desire to stop while there's still yet time. We have heard of few instances where people who showed definite signs of alcoholism were able to stop for a long period because of an overpowering desire to do so. Here is one. Also, for those of you that are new in this meeting, we also sometimes throw in who's who when we talk about different people in the book in the very beginning, which I think is kind of cool. This particular story is a combination of stories that came from the Oxford group and from different ideas to try and get a message across, okay? A man of 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the morning, right? After these bouts, he quieted himself with more liquor. He was ambitious to succeed in business, but saw that he could get nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started, he had no control whatever. He made up his mind that until he had been successful in business and had retired, he would not touch another drop. An exceptional man, he remained bone dry for 25 years and retired at the age of 55. After a successful and happy business career, then he fell victim to a belief, which practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and self-discipline has qualified him to drink like other men. Out came his carpet slippers in a bottle. Being that it's Halloween, I know somebody that dressed like that once with their carpet slippers in a bottle. Tried to say, do you know who I am? In 2 months, he was in a hospital, puzzled and humiliated. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital meantime. Then, gathering all of his forces, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not. Every means of solving his problem, which money could buy, was at his disposal. Every attempt failed. Though a robust man at retirement, he went quickly to pieces and was dead within 4 years. This case contains a powerful lesson. Most of us have believed that if we remain sober for a long stretch, we could therefore drink normally. But here is a man who, at 55 years, found he was just where he had left off at 30. We have seen the truth demonstrated again and again. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we are in a short time as bad as ever. If we are planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday he will be immune to alcohol. Young people may be encouraged by this man's experience to think that they can stop, as he did, on their own willpower. We doubt if many of them can do it, because none will really want to stop, and hardly one of them, because of the particular mental twist already acquired, will find he can win out. Several of our crowd, men of 30 or less, had been drinking only a few years, but they found themselves as helpless as those who had been drinking for 20 years. To be gravely affected, one does not necessarily have to drink a long time, nor take the quantity some of us have. This is particularly true of women. I drank a gallon of whiskey a day. till my hair fell out and my heart stopped, but it wasn't a problem then. This is particularly true of women. Potential female alcoholics often turn to the real thing and are gone beyond recall in a few years. Certain drinkers who would be greatly insulted if called alcoholic are astonished at their inability to stop. We who are familiar with the symptoms see large number of potential alcoholics among young people everywhere, but try and get them to see it. As we look back, we feel that we had gone on drinking many years beyond the point where we could quit on our own willpower. If anyone questions whether he has entered this dangerous area, let him try leaving liquor alone for 1 year. If he's a real alcoholic and very far advanced, there is a scant chance of success. 1 day, 1 week, even. In the early days of our drinking, we occasionally remained sober for a year or more, becoming serious drinkers again later. Though you may be able to stop for a considerable period, you may yet be a potential alcoholic. We think few to whom this book will appeal can stay dry anything like a year. Some will be drunk the day after making their resolution, most of them within a few weeks. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he has already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. Remember, we heal our spirit, okay? Then we straighten out mentally and physically. So it's a spiritual healing that we do when we work through the steps. Many of us felt we had plenty of character. How many here have plenty of character? I see plenty of characters in here. Yeah. We do. We're amazing people. There is a tremendous urge to cease forever, yet we found it impossible. This is a baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it, this utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. What was it that we mentioned the other day? That if it was easy, when you walked in the rooms, the big board up there would just say, step 1, stop. All right, there you go. How then, this is if you decided then you think, well, I think I am an alcoholic. How then shall we help our readers to determine to their own satisfaction whether they are one of us? The experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful, but we think we can render an even greater service to alcoholic sufferers and perhaps the medical fraternity, so we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking. For obviously, this is the crux of the problem. What sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of that first drink? Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree, which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy, are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon or a bar. Why does he? Of course, what is he thinking? Our first example, now like I said, remember when we go to a participation meeting, different people tell their stories, right? We're going to talk about a couple different real experiences in here. This is really, if you want to look it up, a man called Ralph Furlong. His story, it's called Another Prodigal Story. It was only in the first edition, but Ralph was one of our early members, but we call him Jim here. So our first example is a friend, we shall call him Jim. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He had a commendable World War record. He's a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He is an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition. He did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated that he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, he came to contact with us. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found. He had made a beginning, his family was reassembled, and he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. To his consternation, He found himself drunk a half dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed that he was a real alcoholic and in a serious condition. He knew if he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had a deep affection. Yet, he got drunk all over again. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened. This is his story. I came to work on Tuesday morning. I remember I felt a little irritated that I had to be a salesman for a company or a concern that I once owned. Right? What does that sound like? Resentment. A bit of a resentment, doesn't it? Yes. I used to own this place. Now I'm sweeping the floors. Right? So I felt a little irritated. I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. Right? Then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. On the way, I felt hungry, so I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. I had no intention of drinking. I just thought I'd get a sandwich. I also had the notion that I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, for I had been going there for years. I have a friend that wasn't sure if she could relate throughout this, and as she's going, and I have her permission to say this, but she was like, oh my gosh, I remember thinking, I think I left my sweater at my dope man's house, and I have no intention of using, I just wanted to pick up my sweater. Suddenly, right, I had no intentions of drinking. I just thought I'd get a sandwich. I also had the notion that I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, for I had been going to it for years. I had eaten there many times during the months I was sober. I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still no thought of drinking. I ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it wouldn't hurt me on a full stomach. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. I vaguely sensed I was not being too smart. But I felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. The experiment went so well that I ordered another whiskey and poured it into more milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. Thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, saying nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he would take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. So what do you think started this relapse for our friend Jim? The resentment? The resentment just, you don't understand. He did this, they did that. I'm out of here, right? Is that it?
First of all, he showed up to work on a Tuesday.
He showed up to work on a Tuesday. There you go. I had not caught that one. It's your fault I missed a whole day. Well, before the resentment. So we have no defense against the first drink, right? And resentment send us out very quickly, right? That's not too, encouraging. What do you think happened right before that, though? What was one of the most important things on the page right before that? He failed to enrich or enlarge his spiritual life. When we stay spiritually fit within these rooms, when we help another, when we're out of self, when we practice these things, even if we're not done with our steps and we, say hello to the new person, even though we've got 6 days and they've only got 4, whatever it is, we're enlarging our spiritual life, right? When we fail to do that, a resentment will quickly send us out to, the thought just crossed my mind and I don't know what happened, right? I think that's kind of important because I always thought, resentment, that started it off. But it wasn't really. The first one didn't hurt, so I could keep doing it till it might hurt. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else. You may think this is an extreme case. To us, it is not far-fetched. For this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences. But there was always the curious mental phenomenon that paralleled, went along with, our sound reasoning. There inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check, and the insane idea won out. The next day we would be asking ourselves in all earnestness and sincerity, how could this happen? In some circumstances, we've gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. But even in this type of beginning, we are obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient in the light of what always happened. We now see that when we begin to drink deliberately instead of casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequence might be. Our behavior is absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. I love this because this is how normal people think of us, but when we read it, So let's say the jaywalker, he gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. He enjoys himself for a few years in spite of friendly warnings. Up to this point, you would label him a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him, and he is slightly injured several times in succession. You'd expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. Presently, he's hit again, and this time has a fractured skull. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. He tells you he's decided to stop jaywalking for good. But in a few weeks, he breaks both legs. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promise to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work, his wife gets a divorce, and he's held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get this jaywalking idea out of his head. He shuts himself up in an asylum, hoping to mend his ways. But the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine, which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? You may think our illustration too ridiculous. But is it? We who've been through the ringer have to admit, everybody know what a ringer is? What they're talking about? Those youngins that have never seen before a dryer. We used to wring the clothes out and you get nipped by one of those and it hurts a little. Those of us who've been through the ringer have to admit if we substitute alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we may have been in other respects, where alcohol has been involved, we've been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? Nah, but I'm not that bad, right? Some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We admitted we've had some of these symptoms, but we have not gone to the extremes you fellows did, nor are we likely to. For we understand ourselves so well after what you've told us that such things cannot happen again. I always think of when I went to detox for like 1 week, and I'm like, no, I'm good. No, I don't need to go to those silly meetings. That's all I needed. Just 1 week, I'm back. I got it now, right? We have not lost everything in life through drinking, and we are certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information. That may be true of certain non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at present time, are able to stop or moderate because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is a point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize to smash home upon our alcoholic readers as it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let us take another illustration. This is Fred. Now, Fred is really Harry Brick. He wrote the story A Different Slant, and it's only in the first edition, okay? Harry's was taken out because he later sued AA for it. Okay, we'll take it out. Put another one in. All right, so Fred's a partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good. He has a fine home, is happily married, and the father of promising children of college age. He has so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it was Fred. To all appearance, he's stable, well-balanced individual, yet he is an alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he had gone to recover from a bad case of the jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic, he told himself he came there to the hospital to rest his nerves. The doctor intimated, or might have hinted, strongly that he might be worse than he realized. For a few days, he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so. In spite of his character and standing, Fred could not believe himself an alcoholic, much less accept the spiritual remedy for his problem. We told him what we knew of alcoholism. He was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that his humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he had acquired, could keep him sober for the rest of his life. Self-knowledge, that'll fix it. We heard no more from Fred for a while. One day, we were told that he was back in the hospital. This time, he was quite shaky. He soon indicated he was anxious to see us. The story he told was most instructive. For here's a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, yet was flat on his back nevertheless. Let him tell you about it. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink, but I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, that I had been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men failed. I felt I had every right to be self-confident, that it would be only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. In this frame of mind, I went about my business, and for a time all was well. I had no trouble refusing drinks, and began to wonder if I had been making too hard of a simple matter. I was making a little bit too much out of it, right? One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to the government bureau. I had been out of town there during this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about that. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all. Nothing more. I ordered a cocktail and my meal. Then I ordered another cocktail. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me a highball would be fine before going to bed. So I stepped into the bar and I had one. I remember having several more that night, and plenty the next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York and finding a friendly taxi cab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said and did. Then came the hospital with an unbearable mental and physical suffering. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over the evening in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatsoever against that first drink. This time, I had not thought of the consequences at all. I had commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remember what my alcoholic friends had told me, how they prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come I would drink again. They had said that though I did raise a defense, it would one day give way for some trivial reason for having a drink. Well, just that did happen and more. For what I had learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. I knew from that point that I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental blank spots. I had never been able to understand people who said that a problem that had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. 2 of the members of Alcoholics came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much. Then asked me if I had thought myself alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. I had to concede to both propositions. They piled. Now, it doesn't say in there that 2 members of Alcoholics Anonymous went in there and went, ha, told you so, right? No. We just showed up again, right? We just showed up again. Gave them a little bit more of our experience and heaps of information we've learned, right? They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality, such as I had exhibited in Washington, was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. This process snuffed out that last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. Then they outlined the spiritual answer, a program of action which hundreds of them had followed successfully. Though I had only been a nominal, every once in a while, churchman, their proposals were not intellectually that hard to swallow. But this program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. That was not easy. But the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles could solve my problems. I have since been brought to a way of living infinitely more satisfying and I hope more useful than the life which I lived before. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one, but I would not exchange its best moments for the worst I have now. I would not go back to it even if I could. Well, Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him. He had felt only that first nip of the ringer. Most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they really commence to solve their problems. One of the things I want to mention is it doesn't matter whether you came from Park Bench or Park Place, whether it's whatever your point is that you've decided that this is you, right? Many doctors and psychiatrists agree with our conclusions. One of these men, a staff member at a world-renowned hospital, they're talking of Percy Pollock, who was a psychiatrist at Bellevue, recently made this statement to some of us. What you guys say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic plight is, in my opinion, correct. As to 2 of you men whose stories I have heard, there is no doubt in my mind that you were 100% hopeless. Apart from divine help, had one of you offered yourself as patients at this hospital, I would not have taken you. If I had been able to avoid it, people like you are too heartbreaking. Though not a religious person, I have profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, there's virtually no other solution. Now remember the A, B, and C we're talking and looking for, right? Keep that in mind. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no mental defense against the first drink, except in a few rare cases. He, nor any other human power, no human power, can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. Yay! That is more about alcoholism.